Okay, so then the next question is, what is the Nordic model, sometimes known as the Swedish model? The way it's being introduced in places in the United States, it's being called the equality model. What it is a partial legalization, partial decriminalization model. It's touted as something that will help full service workers because it says that they won't get arrested for doing that type of work. But the reality of it is that workers are still punished under that model, right? So like, for example, it's illegal to rent to someone who is in that industry under the Nordic model. So essentially you're just making people homeless. You'll still have your children taken away from you if they're minors. If you have adult children, like your kids are in college, or you have roommates, or you're living with partners, they can be charged as living off the proceeds of prostitution and essentially being your pimp, which means that you are essentially not allowed to have a support network. We've also seen instances where two workers have been living together, right, like as roommates, and work out of their home. They've been charged with brothel keeping and actually sent to jail for those offenses. So even though you may never actually have directly speaking a prostitution offense, there's still a lot of social stigma attached to it. You can still get deported under this model. So it's not nearly as protective of women and children as it claims to be, because the whole idea behind this model is that it is an end demand model. End demand meaning that the goal is to end the entire prostitution industry, to end sex work as we know it. And so the goal is to get people out of the industry sort of by any means necessary, so that if that means that you deport someone, that's one less worker in your country. That means that if you send someone to jail for something like brothel keeping because they have a roommate, or you send someone to jail because their college age child is living with them and they're using that type of work to pay the rent, you still have one less person when you run your statistics. That's what end demand means, and that's how it works. So really, please don't be fooled by this idea that it's going to protect vulnerable people who are in the industry. And actually, places where it's been implemented, workers have come out repeatedly. You can check with Amnesty International. They've written a lot about this and said that it actually has increased the danger. Not only are there fewer clients, which means people are taking more risks to pay their bills, they're finding that it's also harder to get out because their support systems have been cut. So now think about this. If it was illegal to be a customer for whatever your job is, does that make it easier or harder to do your job? Will you be making more money or less money? Will you be in more danger or less danger, right? And so that's what you really need to think about in terms of how the Nordic model, Swedish model, equality model works, and the harms that come with that. So we really don't advocate for that. What again we want is a full decriminalization model where where you aren't being penalized for being in the industry, because we want to keep people as safe as possible. We're coming from a harm reduction standpoint, not an end demand standpoint, and those are essentially very different in terms of the root philosophy of how they work. We want to keep people as safe as possible because we know that they're in this industry. So how can we help them? How can we help them stay safe? How can we help them build support networks? How can we help get them out if they want to get out, right? That's what we're focused on. We're not focused on trying to end demand and say the whole industry is bad, the whole thing has to go, so get people out by any means necessary, because that's just really ineffective and dangerous. And if you actually look at the stats, if you actually talk to people who live under it, they can tell you that. Because obviously, right? Would you be safer if it was illegal to rent to you? If you were automatically forced to be homeless, are you safer? No, you're not. So that is what the Nordic model is. That is why we do not support it. Okay, if you have more questions, let me know.